When I'm really excited about an idea, I will write everywhere. In the middle of my run, I'll pause, sit on a bench, I'll bring out my phone and just start writing. I also really like doing that because I think I was doing it a lot for the novel. Like after I'd written pages for a day, I would then try to read it again on my phone because there's something about it being in a different medium that makes my approach to it feel different. Yeah, I don't believe in writing every day. In fact, I haven't written for this whole year, actually. Now I miss it. I think I'm going to go back.
Hey, I'm John,
I'm Corey,
and this is The Passage,
the podcast where authors break down their favorite pieces of writing
taking you behind the scenes from the first spark of inspiration
to the final edits and everything in between. One of the first things that struck me when I started reading One Leg on Earth, the new novel by our guest today, was this uncanny quality to the writing. It was something that I couldn't really put my finger on. The prose felt very deliberate, very careful, but there was this rhythm and sort of subtly unsettling, almost hypnotic feeling to it. And it wasn't until about halfway through that it occurred to me that that feeling that I was picking up on, which sort of grew as I got deeper into the story, was kind of mimicking the feeling of being slowly swept up or swept away by something that you hadn't really noticed until it was too late. I patted myself on the back for that connection because it's an idea that the book explores really beautifully in layers of narrative and metaphor about coming of age, motherhood, progress, history, and the future. And I'm still sort of untangling a lot of those connections even now, a few weeks after I finished the book. So I thought it would be really cool to bring the author onto the show to talk about how to write mesmerizing paragraphs, how to build dread without relying on sort of conventional horror tropes, though there are definitely some of those in here too, and how atmosphere can become an essential part of the architecture of a story, among a bunch of other things I hope we'll get to. Pemi Aguda is a prize-winning Nigerian writer whose debut story collection, Ghost Roots, was a finalist for the National Book Award. Her latest novel, One Leg on Earth, was published earlier this year to widespread critical acclaim. Pemi, we are super excited to have you on.
Thank you, John and Corey. And I should say thank you. I think you have pronounced my name in the best way I've heard in the past 6 months.
We did our research. We do our best. Okay, so Pemi, why don't you talk a little bit about the book itself and sort of set the passage up for our listeners?
In the version of Lagos in this novel, pregnant women are walking into water bodies and killing themselves. And an intern who's new to Lagos, she's come from a smaller city to the big city. She's an intern for an architecture firm that is developing a new city on land that's reclaimed from water. When the protagonist quickly realizes that she's pregnant after a one-night stand, she becomes drawn to these women, these drowned women, and shenanigans ensue.
Shenanigans ensue is not exactly how I would describe the rest of the book, but that's okay.
It's hard to talk about your book.
For sure. I totally understand. Okay, please read this incredible passage you picked.
So this passage comes at the end of the first chapter of the novel. When a man eventually approached her, 2/3 into the green bottle, the night was already set on its path. Of course, he sat without waiting for an answer to, "Fine girl, may I join you?" Of course, he said it would be a crime for a pretty girl like her to be sitting all alone at an hour like this in a city like this, and maybe it was destined, yes, destined, that Yosoye would tilt her head until her maroon braids pulled on one shoulder and ask if he was there to remedy that. The lines came unrehearsed to her lips, the script of a worldly woman, she who had always been a hesitant speaker, one who revised her sentences in her head over and over until her conversation partners repeated themselves, assuming she'd never heard them. Was she the same girl? Yosoye from 5 days ago would have been gobsmacked, would have clapped her hands like a Nollywood village girl and said, now you be this. This is you, yeah? She was heady with unexpected success, so when he rose and took her hand, she didn't protest. She didn't think, too fast, too fast, too fast. No, she thought, give me, give me. This was exactly what she wanted from Lagos. Unpredictable turns to a day so that what was up was suddenly sideways, and that 8 p.m. would bring adventure that 6 a.m. never dared to anticipate, and enough courage to stop her from curling back into herself, retreating into the loneliness she was used to, the comfort of its grasping arms. In the cheap motel that smelled too strongly of air freshener, Yosoye removed her clothes with a determination alien to her, a forthrightness that belied inexperience. A handful of painful times was the extent of her sexual knowledge, cold clutches and dry entries, but she did not remember those discomforts in this moment. All she thought was now, was yes, was give me. She flung off her blouse, impatient for what came next, for her future. Her flesh fed on its own hunger, slicked from her eagerness alone, did not look to this man to generate the wet heat needed. She would not remember the air conditioner giving up with a short bang or the diamond patterns of the bed sheet, and when his socks dropped to the floor, she could not be sure if it was rat or shadow that darted over them. Yosoye would deliberately refuse to remember him complaining about the condom, pulling out, tugging swiftly and efficiently enough to suggest practice, flinging the rubber into the foliage of a fake indoor plant to be found by a whistling cleaner or to ferment there forever. What Yosoye did remember was the feeling of being tugged along these Lagos nights, lured, pulled, towed, not the rhythmic smacking of his sweaty punch against the inside of her thighs, but a grander hypnotic feeling of being swept up in a current, dragged in the surge of a ravenous tide.
Pemi, well, the first thing I'll say is that this is probably the first R-rated passage that has been read on the show, so I really appreciate you pushing our boundaries a little bit and taking us into unfamiliar territory.
It is barely R-rated. Come on.
Maybe what we've had on the show so far has been a little bit on the tame side. But when I read this passage, when I hear you read it, it echoes so much of the stories that I read in your collection, Ghost Roots. The feeling of inevitability and the questions around self-determination of whether you are able to sort of be your own person or whether you have free will or whether you are, as you sort of said, swept up in this current that you can't really control. So I would love to get into all of this with you. But the first thing that I kind of want to know is, do you remember where you were when you wrote this? Do you remember the exact moment that you drafted this?
I do not. But it must have been in Philadelphia because this passage is actually, or this chapter is newer in the book than most of the others. Yes. Before, in earlier drafts, I moved directly from the prologue or the first section to Yosoye's first day at work. And so this was a more recent introduction. So I imagine I was either at this very desk here or in my former apartment. Yeah.
What do you remember about writing this itself?
In earlier drafts, Yosoye has a boyfriend. He goes away to the US for grad school, so she doesn't tell him that she's pregnant, but he's there, he's far away. And I think I decided later on that I didn't want that to happen because I wanted her life in some sense to be parallel to her mother's, because as I think Corey was saying, part of the questions I think of a lot of my work is just how much of you is you versus, just fate. And one of the questions she's asking in this book is she just destined to repeat her mother's experiences? So once I realized that boyfriend was gone, and this strange man was going to be present, then I think even this passage itself, writing it was a little bit hypnotic, just flowing from, yes, it was destined. And there's a movement, I think, in the passage, and which is part of why I chose it, that has the sound of, that tide. There's something a bit unrelenting about it that just keeps going and going and going. So I think I remember feeling that. It's kind of intoxicating, writing a passage that just flows out of you. And I think this happened that way.
So this was a relatively, let's say, quote unquote, easy scene to write.
Yes.
Are they all?
Oh, no.
No.
Oh, not at all. Some days are so difficult, but I'm one of those people who's very excited about revision. So I'm always happy to write a hot mess of a draft and then go back and make it good.
But this came out somewhat fully fleshed, or at least the tone or the voice of it was there.
Yes, I think the voice of this was definitely there. Before this call, I tried to look through older drafts, but I didn't find one that was too different from this.
So what you had originally written down on the first go is pretty close to what actually ended up in the book.
Yes, because at some point I started this book from scratch because I didn't know what I was doing. And before I went back in, this was actually 2024, which isn't that long ago, I wrote a rough outline, and it was that outline I found. And that outline is where I introduced this chapter. And the gist of it is Yosoye is in Lagos. She has put things on the shelves. She walks out into the street. She meets a stranger. And there's a feeling of being like pulled in a current. And that's basically the gist of the outline. And so all of this is just a fleshed out version of that.
You said that you started from scratch. Does that insinuate that you had gotten pretty far into an original draft and you decided to scrap it and start over?
Absolutely. My editors already had acquired the novel. We'd already had conversations, and they just had questions that I was struggling to answer. And so I figured instead of trying to just like cut and stitch in the middle, I would just open a blank page and try to do it all over again. But because it had been in my head for, at that point, I don't know, 2019 to 2024, it was new, but it wasn't that new because the story had already lived in me for such a long time.
So you wrote the novel all over again.
I did, yes.
Wow.
Thinking about doing that makes my hands sweat. Honestly, like all those hours.
Yeah.
I'm so curious because I assume that when you finished the first draft or the first iteration of the novel that you probably felt pretty good about it and you sort of submitted it to the editor. What was your response? Like, talk us through what it was like to get the sort of feedback, and at what point did you independently arrive at the idea of, you know what, it would be better for me creatively, or it would be better for the book if I just put it all to the side and started over from scratch, as opposed to trying to revise, which you had sort of mentioned earlier is actually a process that you quite enjoy?
So I think starting over again is a kind of revision. So actually, when I submitted this novel to editors, I knew that it wasn't working yet, but I felt like I had come to the edge of my own capabilities. And so I was excited to get on board with editors who shared my vision or had good ideas for how the story could sharpen, right? So it ended up being a sort of collaboration between me and my my US editor, and my agent, who used to be an editor also in the past. And we would have these team calls and everybody would just say what they felt. And I was using my antenna to, like, who do I most agree with? Why am I resisting this person's, suggestions? And then I would go back by myself. And I think maybe 2023, we'd had a call where I felt quite frustrated. And I don't think I spoke to them about starting all over again.
What were you sort of intuitively feeling wasn't working when you first submitted it?
I thought that there were too many things going on. And the book does have several things happening, but even then, it was way more. So, I'm a short story writer, and the zero draft of this novel came from a class in my MFA where I was persuaded by the director to join a novel writing class. And the premise of that class was that you would write a short novel of 50,000 words in one semester. Because I'm a short story writer, the way I approached it was as a short story writer, in the sense that I would write one chapter about Yosoye, I would get bored, and then I'd pick another random person in the city and write a short chapter on them. So it became this polyphonic novel in some sense, even though Yosoye was clearly the main character. You know, there was a chapter about the governor, there was a chapter about like a random person in the street. And some of those things are like there in the spirit of the book still. But I think over time, just there was a lot of refining in terms of what I thought the real story was. So that's what wasn't working yet. It was that there were too many things going on. It felt disjointed, and you know, there was just a question like, what are you writing about, that I don't think I quite knew how to articulate then.
And was the breakthrough when you decided to focus on one character and just tell that story for the most part, or did that come even later?
It came, I mean, by the time 2023, Yosoye was mostly the major person in the story. It's hard to like talk about what the breakthrough was, because I find this thing so mystical. Like, I don't know what the chemistry was of my brain or the day or any of these things that made things click. All I knew was that because I was so frustrated, I thought it would just be best for my mental health to just have a blank page and just try to tell the story all over again.
That's a brave solution to come across yourself. Like, if I can be completely candid, it's hard to imagine getting to the point where you just sort of knew intuitively, as you say, like you can't really remember the point when you wrapped your head around it, but just sort of saying, okay, I put a lot of work into this, but the best thing for the story, the best way to solve this problem is to just take what I've done, use it as a notes or background or whatever it's going to be, and just try and do it over again.
Can you talk to us a little bit about the process of short story writing versus novel writing?
I just don't know how to write a novel. Perhaps because I've been writing short stories since I was a child. So there's a sense that even when I trust myself in a way that I don't quite with a novel yet, because there have been several success points that I can point to. Like, I was able to do that before. And as I'm speaking, I realized that I have had this experience where I have written a new short story, and then 1 year later I realized that in fact it was an old short story draft that I had abandoned and somehow dismissed in my brain, and then written all over again. And then I'm like, whoa, it's like the same, it's the same thinking, it's the same nugget of ideas. Anyway, but I think for me with the novel, the hardest thing was just being able to hold the scope of the whole thing in my head. I'm just so used to being involved with my characters in just such a short time frame or a space of their life. For a few years in my early 20s, I was writing a fiction column for this like cultural website in Nigeria. And I had a column which meant that I was writing a short story every week. And sometimes the story would just, because it was flash fiction, sometimes the story would just be a scene between two characters. We don't really get much context about their lives. So that's kind of my energy when it comes to short stories. So with the novel, I had to do way more work in terms of just staying with a character over time, over such a long period of time. And sometimes I would forget what I had written 20 pages ago. And then I'd go back like, oh, did I already have this? And I had all these epiphanies that I would realize were false epiphanies because I'd already had those epiphanies before. So that was like happening so often in this project. I'd be like, oh, I figured it out. And I'd write it on my phone in bed. And the next morning I would see that the exact same thing already existed in some other thing on my computer. So I don't know.
That's amazing.
With the novel, it was like an uphill battle. It was such a struggle to open my brain up to hold everything. And I was at an event last week where one of the people in the room asked me if, now that I've written a novel, do I think that my short stories will be different? And I said that I don't know yet. Like, I can't see any change. But since then, I've been thinking about that question. And I think like if I think of it as for most of my life, I've been writing short stories, and the creative space I can, like I'm imagining it as like one room in a house. Like now that I've written a novel, like there's a wall that has been broken down. So maybe just like my tools have expanded, or there's just more there's more space in how I can grab. I think there's a spaciousness that was widened now that I've written a novel.
Pemi, did I hear earlier you say that you had an outline at some point for the novel? It was creating an outline very different, a departure from how you would approach a short story?
Absolutely. That's a good point because I never wrote outlines. Like for short stories, I just don't care. It's like it's such a short story, and a lot of times I don't know where I'm going, and it doesn't matter because I'll get there when I get there. And then I'll go back and, remove what doesn't need to be there. But because it was such a struggle to hold the whole thing in my head, I started writing outlines where I would just, even after I'd written half of the novel, I'd have it just summaries of each chapter to just remind myself what's happening. Like what's happening here, what could happen here, what are some possibilities I can play with. And then I kept referring back to them. Of course, these outlines, a lot of times I abandoned them. But they were always good as a guideline to refer to.
Did you ever think about abandoning the novel and just turning it into a short story?
It started as a short story. I had written a short story that I submitted to a magazine, and the feedback was that they liked it, but perhaps it was a longer project. And so when I came to I told you there were too many things going on in earlier drafts of this. So when I came into the MFA and they suggested the class, I figured, let me go back to this thing. And of course, it changed so much over time. It's very almost unrecognizable from that short story, but that was the beginning point.
Did you get any advice along the way to help you sort of figure out how to work on a novel length project?
I mean, sure, there was a lot of advice, but I'm thinking now, so a friend of mine who just, I think, had a 15-year anniversary for her marriage said that she had asked her husband if he had any advice for married couples. And the husband said, well, I only know how to be married to you. And that's how I feel. Like, yes, I got a lot of advice, but it doesn't really translate. It doesn't really translate because everybody's battles are so singular. And yeah, it's just so dependent on like the chemistry of you, the chemistry of the project. The one thing that the advice I got that I also gave is just to like read a lot. So I tried to read a lot of books that I thought were either doing interesting things or doing something I thought I was struggling with. And I don't think my brain is very analytical. Like I tried to read Severance, for example, which is that book by Lingma, which I think is great. I read Severance maybe 3 times, and I tried to like write down what was working, but that's not the way my brain works. My brain works by reading it, and then something happens in the background, in the subconscious, and then I find that when I go back to the page, I've learned something that I might not be able to articulate. So just reading all sorts of books that are doing the things that I want to do was the best advice.
Why did you think to read Severance in the first place? What was it that you admired so much of that book that you saw in parallel, or that you saw maybe connected to the book that you were hoping to write?
Yeah, I think Severance has similar themes in terms of like a lonely protagonist in a big city. But I also think that Lingma does like the quiet unsettling in a really really interesting ways. And she had these chapters that felt like worlds into themselves that I was like, how did she do that? How did she do that? And she's also thinking about like pregnancy and like culture, and I don't know, I just thought it was a really well done book. There were earlier drafts of this novel that were they're way more speculative than it is now. Just the volume was all turned all the way up. And I thought that I wanted to write a novel that wasn't quite that speculative. And I think that was part of why I was reading Severance a lot, because I think there's a strangeness in terms of the disease, but that's, as we have seen, is not that it's not that strange at all. So I think I was curious about how to write fiction that is unsettling but isn't necessarily using all the extreme powers of speculative fiction.
A lot of the short stories from Ghost Roots, for example, occupy a very fine line between there are two plausible ways to read what is happening. One is the sort of literal supernatural way, and the other is more allegorical or more metaphorical.
Yeah, I mean, somebody who does this that I love is Shirley Jackson. I think like a lot of her work is, I'm like, is this psychological? Is it supernatural? And I'm more interested in that dance than an actual answer of whether or not something is happening. That said, I also talk about growing up in Lagos where the strange is just kind of every day. I have cousins and friends who have stories that anybody would, anybody here, I think, would be like, did that really happen? But they say it's in a way that is clearly just normal for them. And I'm interested in what happens when I take that reality seriously. Like what happens on the other side of that.
Yeah. You've described such a long gestation period for this novel and the many iterations that it's gone under. And so I'm curious about the different places that you might have wrote them in. Did you write any of this novel or any of the earlier drafts in Lagos? Was it all in the US in different cities?
So the story that I wrote that started this whole journey, I wrote it in Lagos. The zero draft I wrote in the MFA, and then all the revisions happened in so many places. In 2020, I moved back to Nigeria, and then I lived in Abuja, which is the capital, for about 4 months. I just, booked like a small Airbnb, and I didn't have many friends in the city, and I just holed up and wrote like several drafts there. And then I went to Miami. I got to work with Edwidge Dantica on a draft of this. And then I did a residency hopping for a year. So I wrote it in very many places. And then I came to Philly, which is where I wrote the new drafts from scratch. And now we're here.
Do you feel like it was a different process when you were in Nigeria trying to write about a story that's set in Nigeria versus being in the US?
I'm sure yes, right? Like, I'm sure the answer is yes. No matter where I am, it has its own challenges. Like, if I was writing this in Lagos, I mean, I would probably have been distracted by so much. And I don't know how, like, at the time I was writing this, I didn't think it was a political novel. But now I'm like, duh, girl, like, what are you talking about? Like, you're you're like, oh, the Lagos state government is neglectful. And so is there a possibility that I might not have thought to do that when I was smack in the middle of Lagos? Maybe. I don't know. It's easy to like draw lines in hindsight, but I just don't know. I'll say that it was interesting to write this when I was in Miami though, because like Miami, similar to Lagos, like coastal city. While I was there, there was a collapse of a building on the waterfront. I don't know if you remember that story. And like Edwidge and I just talked about that. Like it was interesting to be there, like 20 minutes away from this thing happening and writing about a city that was being built on like water reclaimed from the ocean. So there was something about that, the fear that I'm sure came through somehow in the fiction. Yeah.
Were you working on other things in between this, or when you were working for this period, was it only coming back to this project?
It was mostly this. I have written a few short stories. What happened was this novel, I got a 2-book deal at end of 2022, and then we were working on production of Ghost Roots, and I was writing this. So it was mostly this and already published work. There wasn't a lot of new stuff. I think it's hard. I can revise short stories when I'm in the middle of novel, but it's not really easy to follow a new idea because a novel just takes over everything.
At the risk of you hating this question, can you describe just sitting down to write? What is the process look like?
when I'm really excited about an idea, I will write everywhere, which is in the middle of my run, I'll pause, sit on a bench, I'll bring out my phone and just keep on writing. I also really like doing that because I think I was doing it a lot for the novel. Like after I'd written pages for a day, I would then try to read it again on my phone because there's something about it being in a different medium that makes my approach to it feel different. But I don't believe in writing every day. In fact, I haven't written for this whole year actually. Now I miss it. I think I'm going to go back. But
Really? It's May.
it's May.
Wow.
I know.
Do you worry that when you sit down to write again, it'll be like a muscle that's slightly atrophied, or no?
No, I'm reading all the time and I'm having ideas and I'm writing ideas down and I'm editing older, like,
Okay.
my agent wants to send something out, I'll edit it. I was at a residency at the end of last year, or 2 residencies for like 2 months. So that was a lot of writing.
Yeah.
I think I'm fine with some space in between. I like to say that I'm a person who writes versus like a capital W writer. And so just like living is part of it.
It sounds like you really don't have or don't rely on much of a routine. There are some authors that we've spoken to that are very much, I get up at 6 a.m., I have my cup of coffee, I go to my office or a particular place, and they
hit the
need
word
to
count.
be in the same place, doing the same things to be able to get into the groove of writing. But you're writing on your phone in the middle of a run. You're writing at a residency. You're writing in different parts of the country or the world. It seems like you really don't have any sort of a problem of getting that creative juice flowing from wherever.
When I was doing the fellowship in Miami, I had 1 year of uninterrupted time. There were no responsibilities associated with that fellowship. And so with a thing like that, I felt like I had to have some kind of routine just so that I wasn't spending all my time on South Beach, So those days I would wake up, read a little bit of something that would inspire me to write, like either that's poetry or other fiction where the language feels alive. And then I'll try to write for like 3 to 4 hours and then I'll go out into the world and people watch. And then maybe at night I would read what I read in the morning and see how I feel and maybe make notes for the next day. But that's, I think, the only time in my life where I had a real routine.
Can you describe the feeling of writing when it's exciting?
It's like, yeah, like we're talking about like it being hypnotic, right? It's the thing that is most exciting to me. I'm somebody who is I'm very efficient. Is that the right word? I don't think that's the word I'm looking for. And I'm punctual. I never submit things late. If I tell somebody I'm going to do something, I will do it. I'm
Professional.
Yeah, well, professional, but like just in the world, in my friendships, not my relationships. But the only time I can be unreliable is when I'm in the middle of something that really, really excites me because it just takes precedence over everything else. And I'm like, no, I want to stay in this world. Like it's exciting, it's sweet, it's delicious. Yeah, that's what it feels like. And I'm just really thrilled by it, and then I want to share it with somebody I love. That's what tends to happen.
But on the flip side, there must be hard days, right?
Yeah. Yeah, there are hard days.
Like when it's not working, when you like have an idea and it's just not translating.
When you have to start your novel over from scratch.
When you have to get...
Well, I don't know. Were you excited when you arrived at that idea? Were you like, wow, I'm really looking forward to doing this all over again, but like free of everything that was frustrating me about the first iteration?
I think using the word free is good because I was telling somebody the other day that I find that when I lose something, whether it's stolen or I misplace it, there's something that's kind of thrilling about me because I'm like, now I don't have to think about you anymore, right? And so there was a similar feeling in starting this project from scratch, where I was like, you don't have to, you've put all those frustrations aside like this. But I think I had a sense that when I started again, that it was going to be the one, just because I had struggled so much. And I was like, you've done all of this hard work. It's in the back of your subconscious. Like, now it's going to be good. I think I trusted that this would be the one. And I was so glad that I was right. But on the bad days, I have faith in the future that even the most horrible sentences I'm writing will be to some good.
Yeah.
And that there's a Pemi in 2 weeks that will know what to do, even though Pemi of now doesn't. So I just need to kind of put it down.
That's a really admirable, optimistic attitude to have. I'm not sure that every writer would necessarily have that confidence of like, I know future me will knock this out of the park.
No, I think that I've thought about this a lot too, that maybe the one thing that I think has come with experience in writing in my own sort of professional life is the confidence that a really bad sentence or paragraph can be made good with enough work. That it's not just bad, period. That like, it's fine. It will get better. Don't worry about it too much in some way or another.
And even if it goes away, you just needed to write it to get to the next thing. So
yeah, for sure.
Part of the process.
Yeah.
Pemi, something we ask all of our guests is if there was one author who you could ask about their own process the way we're asking you, who would that be?
Is this something that has to be within the realm of possibility?
Could be dead or alive, or I suppose fictional, if you want to go that route.
Yeah.
I would, I'm kind of obsessed with Han Kang,
Okay.
The vegetarian?
the vegetarian. So I think that would be it.
What about it? What about?
I love the vegetarian so much. I just had a conversation with Lauren Groff where she asked me books I was reading when I was writing this, and I mentioned the vegetarian, and she was like, yeah, I picked up on that. And that made me so
Interesting.
happy because I was like, I don't even know that there are lines that you can necessarily draw. Maybe you think about like women, bodies, society, autonomy.
Yeah.
Some of those things are there. But I think that Han Kang writes such visceral fiction, and I want to know how she does it. It's like, how do you get to that place? And it's surprising, like that novel, with the 3 parts, the 3 perspectives, like how did you get there? Was it something that she always knew was going to happen? We never really get the main woman's point of view except for like the dream sequences. Like that's an interesting choice. Like I want to know what's behind all of these decisions.
It sounds like, I know you sort of said earlier that for you it's writing or the creative process, it's sort of difficult to describe, but I also know that you teach writing.
Yeah.
Do you think about like sort of the mechanics of storytelling in your own work, or is it really sort of purely intuitive for you?
I swear it's intuitive. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I'm such a quack. What am I doing? In terms of teaching, I think that less and less these days because I'm now trusting that I have things to say. But in my own work, I'm not thinking about it. And sometimes I feel bad because I'm telling these students, like, look at what this person did. And sometimes I can't even say that about my work. I'm like, oh, I wrote this story. Look at the structure. Look at how it's shaped. But in the moment, I was not thinking about craft. I was just like trying to write this story. So yeah, a lot of it is subconscious or intuitive for me.
It's a lot easier to teach, okay, every story has to have this plot structure or this arc than it is to teach intuition. You've sort of mentioned earlier just the idea of reading, and
Yes.
that can translate into intuition or can kind of build up subconscious what a good story does.
Yeah. And I guess that's one thing I can give to my students is like, I think if you read these people, you might get something out of it, even if I can't articulate why exactly. But there's a spirit of these books or these stories that will help you in what you're trying to write.
Should we do some rapid fire questions? Pemi, are you okay if we ask you some 10 or so questions really quickly, and you don't have to give us long, detailed answers.
Okay, sure. Let's see.
Excellent. All right. So, what's one aspect of writing you think you're particularly good at?
Description.
What's one aspect of writing you think you're bad at?
Oh my God.
These are the two hardest, so don't worry.
Oh God, this is supposed to be rapid fire, so I don't have a one-word answer.
It's okay.
But it's like hard to articulate, but I've sometimes will read a novel that has such intense characterization of like everybody, and I'm like, how did you do all of that? I think I have to really go there for it to work. I think I'm more vibes than like that interior deep characterization. Is that true? I don't know. Well, that's my answer.
That's
a good answer.
It's a good answer. I don't know if it's true or not.
Okay. What's harder to write, the first line or the last line?
The last one.
What's the first thing you edit out of a draft?
All the ums, but you know the way it appears on the page in terms of she thinks, she feels, all those fluffy words where I'm not saying I'm not getting right to the point. Yeah.
Is there a word that you always misspell and autocorrect saves you?
No.
Nice. Good speller.
How many titles did One Leg on Earth go through before you landed on the final one?
Just one.
That was the one from the beginning.
Oh no, well, there was one before this one.
Okay.
Do you want to share it with us?
Oh sure, it's all over the internet. It was called The Suicide Mothers.
Oh, okay. Okay. And how did you come to One Leg on Earth?
So One Leg on Earth is from a Yoruba saying, which is Esekoaye, Esekorun, which is one leg on earth, one leg in heaven. It's usually used to talk about pregnant women and the in-betweeners. And so on one of the brainstorming sessions with my editors, it was Anna Kelly, my UK editor, who was like, what of One Leg on Earth? And I immediately thought, yes, that is the title.
Yeah, that's perfect.
When you're writing, it sounds like you're all over the place, but do you do longhand? Are you working in Google Doc, Word, something else?
Yeah, Word, but Google Doc, Word, that combination of those two. I don't do longhand. Not anymore. My wrist hurts.
But you used to.
There was a period where I wanted to be a longhand girl, and so I tried really hard, and now I'll use it to, like when I'm at a residency and I'm trying to romanticize my writing life, I'll take a fresh notebook and I will go on walks and I will write. But when it comes down to actual drafting, I just like my keyboard because it's fastest thing.
Romanticize is the perfect word to use there because it always feels so cool or so romantic in your head to be like, oh, I'm just going to be the type of person that has a little notebook and I'm going to have really neat handwriting and I'm just going to, all my ideas are going to go in here.
I have a friend who wrote their whole novel in exercise books, and I couldn't be here.
Music, TV, podcasts in the background, or just complete silence when you're writing?
Are there people writing with podcasts in the background?
We have yet to find somebody who does, but I'm sure they're out there.
Wild. Yes, I love music in the background.
And what do you listen to? Give us a little sneak peek at the type of stuff that you have on.
All sorts. It depends on the day. If it's a creation day, then I will be trying to listen to something that evokes something of the emotion that I'm trying to put on. So in the novel, there's a song, Yemoja by Angelique Kidjo. And Yemoja is like an Orisha of water. So there was something about that just felt very haunting. And I listened to that song on loop a lot of times. When it's an editorial day, it doesn't really matter. I just like to have I zone out of the words anyway. So I just play random songs from my liked songs or something.
So odds are that song might have been playing when you drafted the passage that you read at the top of the show?
Yeah.
Our last question for you, Pemi, is kind of a funny one. What is your go-to procrastination method?
I paint my nails. Because it's a nice thing to have on my keyboard when I'm going.
Yeah, and when you're writing,
And
your
when I'm
hands.
writing, the few
Exactly.
times I write.
Pemi, that is all the questions that we have for you. It's been really fun to talk with you and to learn a little bit more about your process.
Thank you. I'll say that I don't typically love interviews, but I've enjoyed this one. So thank you both for making me feel comfortable.
That means a
Absolutely.
lot. That
Yeah.
means a lot. It was super fun for us.